At American University, we are committed to pursuing inclusive excellence. One of our practices shared from our Indigenous and Native communities is to offer a land acknowledgement at the beginning of our meetings and events. The goal is to build our mindfulness of the historical processes in which we still participate. American University is founded on the unceded land of the Nacotchtank, Anacostan, and Piscataway peoples. I ask you to join me in acknowledging these communities, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. American University also acknowledges that it was founded upon exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous peoples, including those on whose land this institution is located. With this acknowledgement, we commit to working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. Those of you who attend our events know that we always provide a land acknowledgement. I would encourage you today to take this a step further and do some research on the land where you're sitting. If you are not aware of the history of the land, you can click on the link in the chat to research it, or send a text to the number in the chat. As we get started today, I would like to introduce you to our student team overseeing today's workshop. Ashton Johnson will be our Zoom moderator, introducing our speaker and fielding any questions on Zoom. My name is Heather Ginsel, and I will be our Facebook live stream moderator. I will let us know if any questions arise on the Facebook feed. I will also wrap up the session at the end, giving us a summary of what we've learned today. Take it away, Ashton.
Hello, everyone. So before we get started today, I would like to hear where you are joining us from. If you'd like to, perhaps write in the chat box where you are joining us from, and I will read it out loud. So I'll give you all a couple of seconds to do that. All right, so we have people from Afghanistan, from Senegal, from Ivory Coast, from Minnesota, Pakistan, right here in Washington, D.C., Virginia, Italy, Toronto, Houston, Texas, Wichita, Kansas, Toronto, Ukraine, and New Jersey. So thank you all for joining us. And Heather, do we have anyone on the Facebook feed?
No, not yet.
All right. Well, we are glad to see we have people joining us from all over the world. So our speaker today is Ashley Bishop, who is an alumna from our measurement and evaluation program. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section or the chat. We will have some time for questions throughout the presentation today. All right, and take it away, Ashley.
Awesome. Well, hello to everybody. As we say often at Winrock, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. It's really exciting to hear that people are joining from all over the world right now. Really grateful that you took some time out of your day to join us today. As Ashton mentioned, my name is Ashley Bishop, and I completed the Master of Science of Measurement and Evaluation at American University a few years ago, and I'm excited to continue to be part of this community. Thank you for having me today. And today I'll be sharing with you an experience that we had in the company that I work for, Winrock International, where we were conducting a final program evaluation, and we integrated the use of most significant change into that methodology. So love to start here with this photo of some of the girls that were really leaders in the program. The program worked with adolescent girls to help raise awareness and motivate families to ensure that younger girls were going and continuing school in their communities in Mali. These girls are from Koro, and they're posing here with the U.S. ambassador to Mali in Bamako during one of the final closeout workshops, where they were sharing their experiences and the lessons that they learned to help education leaders in Mali learn from the experience and plan new and exciting ways to work in education in Mali. So this is a presentation that I had the pleasure to give with some colleagues at the most recent American Evaluation Association conference that was held in October 2023. So this presentation follows what we delivered there. I hope it'll be interesting to you. It really gets into the weeds of our evaluation design process. So first, we're going to go through here a very brief introduction to this program, the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID's Girls Leadership and Empowerment through Education, or for short, GLEE project. Then I'm going to talk to you about the evaluation design team and our final evaluation design and process, the experience that we had using most significant change in this process, and share with you a few of the girls' stories and how we were able to weave those into our evaluation conclusions. I'm hoping we have a good chunk of time for questions and answers at the end, but I am also happy to take questions as we do the presentation. I'll pause at a few places and ask my colleagues, Ashton and Heather, to let me know if there are any questions I can take as we go through some of these sections here. So first of all, just to set the stage, as I mentioned, I work for Winrock International. Winrock is an American-based non-government organization. We are based in Little Rock, Arkansas, and Arlington, Virginia. We operate in 40+ countries, running 100+ projects. One of our largest donors is the U.S. government, multiple agencies within the U.S. government, and one of those is USAID. And so here we're going to zoom right in over here to Mali in West Africa and talk about one of the projects that Winrock International leads, or most recently led in Mali. So as I mentioned, the name of the project is GLEE. This was funded by USAID, and it was a consortium-led program. Winrock International was the lead of this consortium, or the prime implementer for USAID. And we partnered with IntraHealth, another international NGO, and two really incredible Malian NGOs, so Groupe d'Animation Action au Sahel Mali, and Oeuvre Malienne d'Aide à l'Enfance du Sahel, excuse me for my terrible pronunciation here. But GAZ and OMIS are really leaders in non-formal education and community engagement in Mali. The program was implemented from 2018 until 2023. It actually just concluded in October 2023 of last year, and operated activities and education in the Kai and Mopti regions of Mali. And the main goal of this overall program was to focus on decreasing barriers to quality education in safe and supportive environments for adolescent girls. The target age was from 10 to 18 years old. At the same time, there was a dual function of the program to also support increasing the adoption of positive and healthy behaviors. To give you kind of a sense of how big the program was and some of the exciting accomplishments of GLEE was that it worked with 180,000 students that were supported through accelerated learning centers. Those are non-formal education centers that are created for children who have never been to school or have been out of school, to help them catch up in a 9-month program and then help them to filter back into formal school settings. We also worked directly with primary schools and secondary schools throughout the program. Over 140,000 scholarships were dispersed to offset school-related fees to help girls go to and stay in school in these locations. Over 2,000 teachers and facilitators were trained by the program in many different areas, including pedagogical training for better instruction, psychosocial training to support students who are living and going to school in conflict-affected locations, and to help promote protection for girls against gender-based violence in and out of schools. And then over 14,000 community members were trained as well to promote girls' empowerment and education. And I skipped over what is probably more exciting than words, some of the pictures that we have from the program here. This is a great picture of many of the learners who were working in an accelerated school center in Koro. And then we also have a photo here capturing a training of trainers event where women and girls were learning how to make reusable sanitary pads, which was part of the menstrual hygiene management at school interventions. So it was quite a large program with a lot of different activities going on. So as I mentioned, we presented this presentation at the American Evaluation Association conference back in October. And we had really hoped that some of our colleagues from Mali would have been able to join us in person. And unfortunately, they weren't able to with the closure of the project. And so we took this picture to maybe more accurately represent the key players in the final evaluation team. Here in the photo, although the print is so small, you have Abubakar Coulibaly, who is the chief of party of the program, Suleiman Coulibaly, who is our male specialist, Kadiatu Abbasi, who is the deputy chief of party and education leader, and then Lamine Kamara, who led the Bandiagara regional office. These amazing staff were really the leaders of this evaluation process in partnership with some of the companies that we worked with. But myself and my colleague, Safal Khatri, we provide support from our home office based here in Arlington. And we bring to provide support a lot of the technical oversight to help the team implementing the evaluation. And then as you'll see in some of the slides coming up, we were also joined by our teammate, Drew Schremer. He comes from School to School International, which was one of the partners in the evaluation. And he really led the qualitative component of the evaluation, which included the most significant change activities that we had. So that's our picture. As I mentioned here, in this program, we did decide to do a large final evaluation of the program. For those of you who work with USAID, you're probably familiar with the fact that oftentimes they decide and they run final evaluations on their projects through a third-party evaluator. In the case of PLE, that they were not planning to do that, and so we decided to run that process ourselves. And so we contracted it out to an amazing team. Ed Intersect is an American-based, education-focused organization. They specialize in doing studies and evaluations of education programs, and they partnered with School to School International, an American-based international group who also focuses on measurement in education, and CIRIPS, which is a Malian-based organization for research and measurement in Mali. So we have a big team here, you can see. So this final evaluation was really designed to do a lot of things. As you can see, the program had many different components, and we really wanted to capture all of the wonderful things and maybe the not so wonderful things that happened during the program. So it was designed to assess the project's achievements as they had originally been designed in the results framework. The evaluation wanted to assess the project's relevance, effectiveness, efficiency, impact, and sustainability. But also, we specifically wanted this evaluation to listen to and engage with girls as key informants on USAID GLEA's outcomes. So let me pause there for just a minute and see if there are any questions of clarification that I could tackle from the chat or from the Q&A. It's a lot of information.
Yes, Ashley, I have one question that was submitted in the Q&A, and it states, did you conduct MSC separately for each implementer's participants and then aggregate the results to measure the outcome/impact?
Excellent, excellent question. So because the program was operated as a consortium, there were not separate locations. Well, let me say it this way. The way the partnership was laid out is that this whole group implemented in one location. And each of the different consortium partners had a lead in certain activities, but it was not a geographic split. So because of that, we evaluated the program as a whole of all the components. And I'm about to show the results framework, and I think that might bring a little bit more clarity to your question, but excellent, excellent question. let me maybe go ahead and go into that because that might already answer some of the questions that people have. So this is the results framework from the program. And I can maybe highlight here some of the roles and responsibilities as they were divided up between the members of the consortium, between the lead partners. So obviously we have our higher level goal and the purpose that I outlined before. We've had three very distinct objectives. The first being decreasing barriers of adolescent girls to quality education access. In here, we had the operation of the accelerated learning centers, in addition to supporting girls and boys, but really focused on girls in primary and secondary schools, working with communities to increase the activities and the roles that they can play in ensuring that girls continue their education. So in terms of the partners operating, OMIS and GAS, the two Malian NGOs, were really operating the majority of the activities going on under Objective 1. Objective 2 had to do with improved safety of adolescent girls in schools. And so here there were activities put in place around specific policies school-wide in all of the schools that we were working with. So in this case, we're really working with education authorities for the public school system. So they're the same locations, it's the same girls who are benefiting and receiving support through Objective 2 and Objective 1. And same thing will go for Objective 3. So it's all in the same location, but just different activities all benefiting the same people. Through Objective 2, there was a lot of work to make the mechanisms for reporting cases of sexual reproductive gender-based violence cases, to improve the referral and reporting mechanisms related to those, and then to also really do a lot of community work to learn about issues and concerns about school safety, feed those into the school system, and try to make improvements. And then the final objective is really the health component led by the partner IntraHealth. And so, but those the activities that were conducted at community level and at school level were all done in the same location. So we didn't use a lens in the evaluation that had to do with one partner or another. It really had to do with the collective achievement of the consortium. So we went into the evaluation design process, as you saw, with a lot of things that we wanted to accomplish. In addition to the three main items that I outlined before, we also had indicators, performance indicators in our management plan that needed to have a final data collection process to compare the change over time. And so we had a mixed methods final evaluation design. The quantitative method that was used was a beneficiary-based survey, and it was implemented with two different participant beneficiary groups. So school directors or head teachers were one respondent group, and girls were a second respondent group with whom we administered this survey. On the qualitative side, this included key informant interviews and focus group discussions. And so this is where the most significant change methodology came into play. And I really have to credit the evaluation team at Intersect School to School and CREPS for the way that they decided to integrate this into the process. So as opposed to having it separate from the process used to measure and collect data on all of those evaluation questions, they built the most significant change process into a focus group with girls. And that's what I'm going to really dig into with you and show you the process that was used and the results that came out of that. But just so that you can see the rest of it, they also conducted focus group discussions and key informant interviews from other school-based respondents, not just school directors, but teachers and a lot of other individuals who are identified. They did the same with key community respondents, and then also did key informant interviews with project staff, so individuals from all of those different organizations that I mentioned before. So for those of you as well, I just want to mention, for those of you who are familiar with the most significant change process, it may not necessarily be done through a focus group. It may not be called a focus group that the most significant change process is done through, but in the form of like the planning of this evaluation, that was the way that it was done here. So it was reflected in one of the evaluation questions, which was articulated in this way. What were the unexpected outcomes of USAID GLEE activities, both positive and negative outcomes, particularly for girls? And so that was within the design of the evaluation, the question that the evaluators were seeking to answer. So each girl was prompted to reflect on and then share a story detailing the most significant change that she experienced in her life that resulted from the project. Then after that, as a group, so a group of girls, they were then asked to select, to hear all of those stories and then select which of those stories best captured the most significant change out of all of the stories that were shared. So to be representative of their group as the most significant of all of those stories. So this is what those groups looked like. We had girls enrolled in schools, so the formal schools, primary school and secondary schools. 5 to 6 girls per focus group discussion. Those of you who have experience running focus groups, you know that there's a lot of different ways to decide how many people should be in your focus group. The evaluation team decided to make it a bit smaller than a traditional focus group size, which could be bigger, because they were going to use this methodology in that forum. And so we had primary and secondary school girls, and so you had different ages as well of the girls who participated through that 10 to 18-year age group. And then we also had girls who were enrolled in those accelerated school centers. So we were getting feedback from girls at 3 different engagement levels with the project. And so in total, 71 girls participated in a total of 12 focus group discussions. This is a screenshot directly from the focus interview guide. And so you can see exactly the way the focus group facilitator set up the process here. So they did a lot of, this is not how the discussion started. There were preliminary things that they did with the girls to make everybody comfortable and establish rapport. Ask a few questions about, their experience with GLEE, and then came to this, that they would be given this key question. So since the GLEE project started in your community, what has been the most significant change in your life related to the GLEE project? And so they gave them, a certain number of minutes to kind of reflect on it. To really dive as well into the word significant was really important. So they discussed what the word significant meant, what it meant to the girls in the room, and then really tried to make sure that they saw that significant refers to something that's notable or profound. It doesn't necessarily mean always that it's good, excuse me, but that it's meaningful and that it's important. And so they gave the girls 5 minutes to think through their own stories. And then after that, what's not, specifically listed here is that they shared the stories orally in this group. Sometimes in most significant change, the story collection process is written. In this case, it was run like a focus group discussion. And so each girl went around and shared their story orally. And as they did that, the facilitator asked more questions and kind of drew out more of each individual girl's story, so that then the whole group of 5 or 6 girls heard everyone's story at the same time. So then after that step, they then engaged in a discussion to reflect about the whole group's set of stories. And then the girls discussed and decided together with the help of the facilitator which of the stories that they were going to choose to be the most significant on behalf of that whole group. And so you can see here, this is another screenshot from the guide, where the facilitator was really meant to help guide them on how to decide what kind of criteria, that they should use to make the decision. And so they helped engage that discussion, but really try to give space for the girls to choose together and decide collectively which of the stories that they voted on or chose would be the most significant for their group. And so this is what kind of came out of that process. So 5 of those 12 groups selected a story that was focused on early marriage, which was quite interesting. It's especially interesting because it is not explicitly something that is in the results framework of the project. So this is interesting for us because that comes back to that evaluation question about, are there things going on that we didn't plan for in the results framework? 3 groups chose something related to improved learning or education value. 3 groups selected stories related to school provisions, maybe things like fees, supplies, or water. And 1 group picked a story related to knowledge and practice of menstrual hygiene care. So now I'm going to share with you some of those stories, which just blows my mind. It's so exciting that we can really hear directly from the girls. So this is one of the stories. So remember, again, this is a story that was picked on behalf of her whole group. So before USA Glee arrived in her community in the region of Bandiagara, a girl said that she had envisioned herself as having a child at the age of 15. She thought there was no risk of having a child at that age. However, now as a 15-year-old ninth grader, she says that girls should not get married until they are at least 18 or 19, thanks to what USA Glee has taught her. She also learned about the complications of teenage pregnancy, including fistula. All this latest information changed the outlook that she had for her future. Instead of thinking she would have a child, she devoted herself to school. It was clear that other girls participating in this focus group had also taken to heart USA Glee's message about the dangers of child marriage and unintended pregnancy. When selecting her story as the most emblematic of USA Glee's change, the other girls mentioned other issues related to child marriage and teenage pregnancy. So citing other stories that either they had or they knew about, including needing a C-section or other complications that would prevent future pregnancies and the financial demands of raising a child. So that's one story, as well as some of the discussion that the group had when they selected this story. Another story was that a girl, an 18-year-old ninth grader in a community in Kai, was married when she was 14 in 2020. Her marriage ended in divorce because she defied her mother-in-law by leaving her community to spend a week at her father's bedside at a hospital in Kai. She received news about the divorce as soon as she reached the hospital. Afterward, her father encouraged her to re-enroll in school. After the divorce, people treat you like a nobody, the girl said. They say the girl has left home to become a prostitute. You'll be a disgrace to everyone, including your mother. It's destiny. The girl has since been active in her community, raising awareness about child marriage. As part of USA Glee, the girl played a role in a sketch as a friend of a girl forced into early marriage due to her family's desire to get some money. She goes to her friend's home to tell her and others the dangers of early marriage and then takes them to the gendarmerie, that's the local police. In her community, she plays a similar role. If I see another girl in the same situation, I tell them about the dangers and the consequences, she said. Early marriage has never worked. All the consequences fall on the girl. She is also unafraid to speak to elders about the topic. I've always challenged old people about the consequences of early marriage and the dangers associated with the practice, she said. And then finally, the third story that I wanted to highlight for you is a 14-year-old ninth grader in a community in Kai said USA Glee changed her life a lot. She said she had been eager to hear the project's messages since she was in 5th grade, but her teacher initially said she was too young to participate. I stopped at the classroom window all the time to follow along for a while, and subsequently he let me participate because I liked it. She said the most significant topic that USAID Glee addressed was early marriage. She had not been aware of it, but it stuck her in her mind when she learned about it. Then she intervened in her family when she found out one of her sisters was going to get married young. I told her not to get married because she might get sick. She asked me how I knew that, and I told her I'd learned it at school. I told her to listen to me and to not marry as a child, and she said there was no problem. I made my father sit down and told him, Dad, you must not agree to give my sister away in marriage because she might get sick. I told him it was our project that told us at school. He said he understood. I spoke to my mother about it, and she said not to get involved. I told her that to get involved, I had to get involved because it could have consequences for my sister. And if she gets pregnant, she could have problems giving birth. Finally, my sister said she's not getting married anymore, and she's still not married. She said she was grateful for the awareness that USAID Glee raised in her community. What struck me the most is that if I had not listened carefully to what the project said, my sister was going to make a mistake, she said. I listened carefully to the messages, I understood them, and they stayed in my mind. That's why I went to give her advice. So those three stories I highlighted here because in our final program report to USAID, those three stories were on the very first page. So we were really excited to hear about these stories, not only that those stories themselves happened, but that other girls voted for those stories to be some of the most significant change, that they also agree with us are things that are significant changes in their community. So as opposed to just what our results framework says, these are the things we want to evaluate and see if they've happened or not, there are these stories that we can also bring up. So when we go back, or the evaluation team went back to answer the original evaluation question, what were unexpected outcomes of the Glee activities, both positive and negative for girls? We were able to highlight stories about avoiding child marriage. Even though it was not an explicit part of Glee's design, evidence showed that there was an impact on girls' perspectives on child marriage. And in some cases, we had stories on various themes showing that girls used newfound knowledge to push back against prevailing social norms. And we also had evidence of girls' determination and desire to seek out services, family planning services and other services. And then in some of the other information we were collecting, we had key informant interviews with health workers who were surprised and reported surprise at the level of engagement that girls were expressing in health-seeking behaviors. Let me have a look here. So I have one more slide I want to show you, and then I think we'll be able to get into some questions and answers. What I just showed you is kind of although integrated into a focus group setting, is sort of the traditional way of showing the outcomes from a most significant change process. Another way that we also looked at the stories that were collected was by the frequency of the topic. So this is another way to look at and maybe analyze the information collected through those stories. As opposed to the stories being shared and then the group selecting one, and then those being the stories that were aggregated up. We documented every story that was collected through those discussions. And so when we look at each individual story and categorize them by topic, then we're able to see what is the distribution of the topics and the improvements or other things, improvements or potentially negative things that the girls shared stories about. We thought that was also a helpful and important thing for us to look at. So here we see the most frequently reported, most significant change from 13 stories were improved menstrual health knowledge and hygiene. We also saw there was quite a lot of stories about the support that Glee provided, things like school fee payments and bicycles and other, goods and services like that. We even had stories about improved literacy. We obviously see a lot of stories about early marriage, but you see that there were also a lot of other things that were also shared quite frequently in the process. So this also was another way for us to look at the information, again, coming directly from girls, and to feed that into some of our other methods of evaluation and answering those evaluation questions ultimately. So the summary and kind of some of our take-home reflections after doing the process is that it was a really helpful way to uncover unplanned or unexpected outcomes. It was also helpful to affirm some of our expected outcomes. It was a nice change, although we didn't only do that. We did a top-down type of design, so results framework to methods to questions and things like that. But then we also had this space for bottom up or a grassroots kind of determination of what's most important to the people that we're serving and what did they all think together is the most important change that they're experiencing in their lives. So asking that key question. We did find that it was quite a time-intensive process, as you can imagine. It did take a lot of planning. It did take, those focus group discussions were very long compared to maybe a traditional one. But the process itself, the whole team found it to be very worthwhile and very rewarding, and a great way to end a project that really focused on participation and listening to girls. So I would love to stop there and have plenty of time to answer questions and hear from others about your thoughts about this topic. So I'll stop there and I think we can start taking questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Ashley. Heather, I wasn't sure if you got any questions from the Facebook Live. I've gotten several from the Q&A and also in the chat as well.
No, I've not. I did see Dr. Peters' comment. If you want to take the Q&A and I can field some of them from the Zoom chat, Ashton, do you want to go ahead and start and then I can find some?
Yes, absolutely. All right. So one from the Q&A is, through this method, how have you separated attributions and contributions?
Rated attributions and contributions. I might need to understand a little bit more, but the way that we presented this and the way that the evaluation team presented this in the final evaluation report was they reported on these findings under the results to this evaluation question. So what were unexpected outcomes? In terms of like then tracing each of the stories back to specific interventions or specific partners or anything like that, we definitely did not do that. As I mentioned, our goal and design is evaluating the whole of the project itself. And so no, we didn't trace anything back to like this specific activity or this specific partner. But just that's how it was interpreted and then affirmed and or confirmed or triangulated with the findings. Sorry to go through the slide here, but the findings from these other data collection processes as well. So we had the findings from these, you know, from the stories with the girls, but then we also had information coming from a lot of other project respondents and informants. So we could see if what was coming up as the most significant change reported by the girls was, you know, either confirmed or we didn't see any other evidence of that from any other groups. In fact, we did, it was affirmed quite a bit by community respondents and school-based respondents in their focus group discussions. While we didn't use most significant change in those focus group discussions, similar types of questions were asked about what are things that you've seen change and things like that. And so most of everything that the girls reported on, including the unexpected one about early marriage, was also commented on by other respondents. I hope that answers the question a little bit.
Ashley, we've gotten a number of questions in the Zoom chat about the selection process. Can you speak more to how the participants were selected?
That's such a good question. So we had gone through a process for the quantitative sampling. And so my recollection is that when we had gone through this process, so here when we had developed, we had a sampling methodology that was used in order to determine the selection process for girls who would be the respondents of the beneficiary-based survey. And so it was, we had a certain target number that were selected for this process here. And that helped inform as well a selection. The number was not the same in that it didn't need to be the same type of, it has to be this number in order to be representative of the full population. But the process that we used for determining and selecting girls to be part of the beneficiary-based survey was then also used to identify, so using a semi-random randomized way to identify and select the girls from each of these locations. So in both cases, we had Glee managed a large database of registration information for all of these schools. And so we had, like a numbering system where we had to get this many girls to participate. We used a randomly generated number to select, those girls from the registration list.
Right, and there were also a couple of questions in the Q&A about positivity bias. So was the evaluation team confronted with positivity bias during the data collection or analysis process? That is, participants were more inclined to report positive outcomes than potentially negative ones. If so, how did the team account for this while synthesizing findings?
Yeah, great question. Definitely a real risk in doing this. So we had the facilitators that were doing this were not project-based staff, not individuals that the girls in the schools were used to seeing on the regular basis throughout the Glee intervention. So in part, that was the first step in running the process with individuals and people that they, weren't engaging with on a regular basis. And then the process for the collection and documentation was conducted obviously through this third party firm. And so I think it's a great question, and it's a real risk in any kind of situation such as this. And I think the way that they tried to encourage was to really spend some time talking about significant, spend some time talking about that it may not necessarily be positive, it may not necessarily be great. But the truth is, I'm sure that there was some positivity reporting bias included in there. But those are the steps that they took to try to minimize it as much as they could.
Actually, there's an interesting question in the chat. It's somewhat related, but I think different enough that it could be really interesting for people who might be wondering the same thing. There is a question about, did you verify the stories? And if no, was it due to lack of time, budget? The stories already had credible information. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we would definitely call this a modified most significant change process, and the verification of stories that may be inherent to the full most significant change methodology or methodologies like outcome harvesting. No, that step did not happen. And thanks for bringing that up. So this is why this is it's an interesting way of doing MSC, but it's not to the letter every step that's involved in the typical most significant change process, which as you mentioned, would include that verification, so that stories would be collected and there would be a level to which there would be more evidence collected to verify the validity of those stories. So in this case, it is just, we got stories and then people reflected and sort of decided together which of the stories they found to be more significant or most significant, but there was not a step of validation.
A question from the Q&A. So can you conduct most significant change through KIIs and IDIs? Sorry, I'm not familiar with those acronyms yet. How would that process differ from how it was used in this project?
Yeah, you definitely could. I mean, IDI, I'm not sure what that stands for. KII, the key informant interviews. Yes, you definitely could. That, depending on the documentation process for that, Mm, I don't see it being any different actually than doing it here. I mean, it would be like the first step that was done here in a group would be done individually with each individual girl, right? And the question would be asked, and then the girl would answer, and the person would write down their story, right? There is a bit of a benefit in this particular context of doing it in a group, especially with maybe someone the girl is not familiar with, in this kind of setting, and also with this age group. There can be benefits. There can also be drawbacks of doing that type of thing in a group. The benefit of doing this in a group is that then the girls together can talk with each other a bit about, okay, what does significant mean? Or obviously, an interviewer could also do that with a girl or with a young respondent. But it can also maybe be helpful to do it as a group to reflect on it too. I definitely see pros and cons. I think it would depend on your particular cultural context, communication culture, the age of the respondents, but I don't see a problem with doing it that way. But then the next step, whenever you want a group to then pick a story, I think the group process there is really helpful.
Actually, if we have time for another one, there was a question asked about, can you talk about the decision to select a single story per group as opposed to describing multiple common themes within a group?
Yes, I believe, and maybe there's different adaptations of most significant change, but in this case, the team, when adapting MSC to fit into the full evaluation, decided to use the selection of a single story. I think that is part of the most significant change process, that a story is selected as opposed to themes. It may be that themes selection and then analysis that sounds a little bit more like outcome mapping and harvesting, but I'm no expert on all of these things. But also I think, practically speaking, the selection of a story was easier and more straightforward than an analysis of themes. At the time during the selection process, already this focus group was like 3 hours long, which is quite long. And think of like as many of those focus groups that they had on top of all these other data collection processes that were going on. This team did a huge amount of work. So I think just from a very pragmatic and practical perspective, selecting a story, because remember, it's happening in the same 3 hour window as you came up with the stories, and then you're selecting one of those stories as a group. That's a lot of work in a short period of time. So that was the reason for that process to be done there. But that's also why we were curious and we wanted to do something like this as well, which we analyzed a bit further, which was maybe getting more at, what are the themes that have come up. And this is very rough. This is like each story with one category. So it's not a more detailed kind of thematic analysis.
And I think we have time for maybe a couple more. So this question was about the design for the process of collecting informed consent for the girls' participation.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the beginning of either one, so the survey, the beneficiary-based survey that was conducted with girls, and then the focus group discussion with on most significant change with girls, we follow the required informed consent process, which in a school-based setting, for us has included that there is a process that we go through with the head teacher, and principle. And so that we're ensuring the documentation of the girls' informed consent, and then on behalf of the head teacher and their parents, that they're that everyone is in agreement of their participation. And if anyone doesn't want to participate, then we don't make anybody participate. All of those, excuse me, all of those things are signed and documented and maintained in our files as well.
Okay, Ashley, another question asked, can you elaborate on the significance criteria? I'm sorry, on how the significance criteria were developed and agreed upon within each focus group so that the group could then select the most significant story for all.
Yeah, so here is the way it was very much done group by group. And the group themselves decided together, based on their discussion of the word significant, they decided together how they would choose the story that was representative to them of the most significant change. And so there's a lot more in the guide about how they systematically went through each one, but the criteria that they decide was very much group by group, so that the girls could feed in and say, I think that something that should be more significant is, I don't know, maybe it helps more people, or that it's a bigger change for the person. But it was in that group that they decided what the criteria would be.
Another question from the Q&A. Would the team have considered most significant change if the girls were younger than 10 years? Would they have facilitated for younger respondents in sharing their stories?
It's a good question. It depends on what age, right? I think that 10 and older was a great, there in terms of child development and what's appropriate at different developmental stages. It worked quite well. Going younger, you'd have to look at which specific age group you'd look at, but it may not be the right method to choose. Definitely, you may need to get into more play-based, art-based type of participatory feedback than this. But it's a good question. And I'm sure there are teams and organizations out there who've tried it with different ages, which I'd also be curious to learn about. So just also to mention, this was a really big learning process for us. We, at the beginning, really felt strongly that we wanted to make sure that girls had a voice in this, and we wanted to find a way to weave it in. At the same time, it's a huge program with a lot of really stringent requirements about what needs to be measured at the end in terms of our performance indicators and to answer these evaluation questions. And so that's why it's it was kind of smushed in there. I think, and we got feedback when I did this presentation at AEA, we got feedback that it worked quite well considering it was an adaptation. And I think the report does list some of the limitations and, things that did need to be taken into account. I also think that because it was one part of a lot of data collection, it's presented in our final evaluation and ultimately in our final report as, it's all presented as pieces of a whole. So it contributes greatly to our understanding of the overall, outcomes of the program. And I would really be sad to have not had that at the end of this project, because no other process here, really gave such a voice to the girls. The beneficiary-based survey is based on our questions, based on very specifically designed indicators, where we're asking based on how this indicator has been designed. But this gave more space to listen. And so that was really exciting.
Ashley, someone had asked, do you think that a single evaluator could conduct MSc?
Hmm.
Do you need it?
It really depends on the size, So like here, it depends on your size, how many people are you trying to talk to? And here we only did it with girls, right? But like if you were using MSc as the full design for the entire final evaluation, it would have been applied to girls and school directors and health workers and like a lot of other respondents. And the qualitative documentation methods process is no joke. In this case, they did full audio recording of all of the sessions. They had to do all of the transcription. That just as a single person facilitating a focus group, that's hard enough. So I think I think you need more than one person. But if you're doing, again, it depends on your scale. But it's a lot of work. It's definitely a lot of work.
I know we're coming down to the last 4 minutes of Ashley's presentation. So a question that I've got in the Q&A as well as in the chat is the final report and then the qualitative and quantitative survey tools available anywhere for people to sort of look at, review, and then possibly replicate in other contexts?
Yes. So as a USAID funded project, their evaluation policy requires that we make it publicly available. This is funded by, the American people. And so once it's approved, the report is being in the bureaucratic process of approval by the mission in Mali. Once it goes through that process and it's confirmed, then we'll be uploading it to USAID's Development Experience Clearinghouse, or the DEC, where it's readily available. And that report definitely includes the tools that were used as well. Yes, they do. So I was really hoping it would be ready by now. Even when I did the presentation at AEA, I wanted to be able to give everybody a link to where the report is. It's caught up a little bit in some bureaucratic tape, but when it is available, I definitely want to make sure I share it with LinkedIn and networks and things like that, because I do think it's a helpful thing to learn from. And if anybody from this call specifically would like me to email the link when it comes, please, just mention that in the chat and I'll jot down your email addresses. Would love to make sure you get a copy of it.
Ashley, with the 2 minutes left, is there anything else you'd like to summarize before we close today?
I would just really like to, again, thank everybody for your time for joining today. It's another awesome picture from one of the primary schools that we were working in. And just thank you for listening to our experiences, and just hope to inspire. Sometimes it can feel like in the reality of designing evaluations and stuff, we can't always use the methods that we want to. And I just hope this inspires people to, give it a try, and learn from it and, listen in the process. That would be it. Thank you guys so much for your time today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ashley, for speaking with us today about most significant change. Thank you so much to everyone in the audience for joining and for the great questions. I can tell this is a topic that I think you've piqued everyone's interest, whether they were familiar with most significant change or not. I know that I personally, this has been a methodology that's been fascinating to me. And so it was great to see a live example of it. I think one of the most striking things to me was just the idea, like you said, of hearing directly the voices of the girls that participated in this program and elevating their voices and getting to hear what they thought was the most significant change, not just for them, but within their groups, So thank you so much for sharing with us again. Our next webinar, just to let everybody know, is March 14th at 1 p.m. Eastern. It's on using AI in evaluation with consultants from intention to impact. I'm going to go ahead and put the link in the chat for the sign up for that. let's see, go ahead and stick that in there. Okay, I'll stick it in just a second. And then for more information about that webinar, you can also link up with our director, Beverly Peters, on LinkedIn. She's also going to put the link to her profile in the chat. So thank you again so much, Ashley, for sharing with us. Thank you for Ashton helping moderate. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather and Ashton. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.